You ever notice how the loudest men in a city are usually the ones most afraid of being ignored? The words drifted softly through the cold concrete parking garage just seconds before everything went wrong. Rain hammered against the steel beams overhead, the sound echoing through the nearly empty downtown structure in slow, hollow waves. A black Lincoln SUV sat crooked across two reserved spaces near the elevator lobby, its headlights cutting through the misty air like pale knives. 24-year-old Ryan Whitmore leaned against the driver's side door with the lazy confidence of someone who had never truly been told no in his life. His varsity jacket hung open over a grey hoodie, expensive sneakers planted carelessly on the wet pavement while two friends laughed nearby, half listening as Ryan scrolled through videos on his phone. The smell of gasoline, rainwater, and damp concrete filled the garage. Somewhere in the distance, tires squealed against slick pavement outside. Ryan barely noticed the older black man walking past him at first. The man moved slowly, carrying a worn leather briefcase in one hand and a small white paper bag in the other. His charcoal suit looked old but carefully pressed, the cuffs slightly faded from years of wear. Rainwater glistened along the shoulders of his coat beneath the fluorescent lights overhead. He looked tired. Not weak. Just tired in the way only long days and long responsibilities could make someone tired. Ryan glanced up when the man paused briefly beside the SUV, staring at the front tire. "Problem?" Ryan asked sharply. The older man blinked once, then pointed calmly toward the wheel. "Your tire's nearly flat," he said quietly. "You probably won't make it 5 miles in this weather." Ryan let out a short laugh. "I didn't ask for advice." The man nodded once as if he'd expected the answer. "Fair enough." He adjusted the paper bag gently beneath his arm and continued walking toward the elevators. One of Ryan's friends snorted. "Dude looked scared to even talk to you." Ryan smirked, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he watched the older man disappear beneath the flickering lights farther down the garage. Something about the calmness irritated him. Most people around Ryan either acted impressed, nervous, or eager to please. This man had acted like none of those things. He acted unaffected. That bothered Ryan more than he wanted to admit. "Hey!" Ryan called suddenly. His voice echoed hard across the concrete walls. The older man stopped walking but didn't turn around immediately. Rainwater dripped steadily from a pipe overhead nearby. Slowly, he looked back over his shoulder. "Yeah?" Ryan pushed himself off the SUV and walked closer, hands shoved into his pockets. "You got a problem touching my car?" The man frowned slightly. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Ryan stepped closer now, his sneakers splashing through shallow rainwater. "I saw you standing next to it." The older man looked confused for only a second before realization crossed his face. "I was looking at the tire." "Right." Ryan gave a sarcastic nod. "That's what they all say." One of his friends chuckled nervously behind him, but the laughter died quickly when the older man finally faced them completely. Up close, his expression remained remarkably steady. Calm eyes. Calm breathing. No fear. No anger either. Just restraint. The fluorescent light above them buzzed softly as water dripped from the ceiling onto the concrete floor between them. "Young man," the older man said quietly, "I was trying to help you." Ryan's jaw tightened at the phrase "young man." Something about the tone felt almost parental, and he hated that instantly. "Don't talk to me like you know me." The man tilted his head slightly. "I don't need to know you to recognize recklessness." The words landed harder than Ryan expected. One of his friends muttered under his breath, "Damn." Ryan stepped closer until only inches separated them. "You think you're smarter than me?" The older man's gaze never moved. "I think anger makes people careless." The garage suddenly felt smaller. Tighter. The rain outside grew louder against the structure overhead while a security camera near the elevators blinked silently in the corner. Ryan could feel his friends watching now. Waiting. The city police chief's son couldn't back down from some stranger in a parking garage. Not in front of people. Not in his city. You got a name? Ryan asked coldly. Elijah, the man answered. Elijah Carter. Ryan stared at him for a second longer before laughing under his breath. Listen, Elijah, he said, dragging out the name mockingly, next time you want to snoop around somebody's car, mind your business. Elijah's eyes dropped briefly toward the nearly flat tire again. Then back to Ryan. Sometimes minding our business is exactly how people destroy their lives. For the first time that night, the smile disappeared from Ryan Whitmore's face. Ryan Whitmore hated silence almost as much as he hated feeling embarrassed. The moment Elijah Carter walked away from him beneath the flickering garage lights, that silence settled over the entire space like cold smoke. Even Ryan's friend stopped laughing. Water dripped steadily from a rusted pipe overhead, tapping against the concrete in slow, hollow clicks while the older man continued toward the elevators without turning around again. That calmness stayed under Ryan's skin like a splinter. Most people reacted when he raised his voice. Most people apologized. Most people recognized the Whitmore name immediately and adjusted themselves accordingly. Elijah had done none of that. He had simply spoken to him like he was another young man making another foolish decision. Ryan could still hear the sentence echoing in his head. Sometimes minding our business is exactly how people destroy their lives. Forget him, one of Ryan's friends muttered awkwardly. Guy was probably drunk or something. Ryan did not answer. His jaw tightened while he watched the elevator doors close around the older man in the distance. Then his phone buzzed loudly in his pocket, breaking the tension. Chief Whitmore flashed across the screen. Ryan rolled his eyes before answering. Yeah? His father's voice came sharp and impatient through the speaker. Where are you? Downtown. You were supposed to meet Councilman Reeves 30 minutes ago. Ryan glanced toward the rain pouring outside the garage entrance. Relax. I am heading there. You are 24 years old, Ryan. Start acting like it. The line disconnected before Ryan could answer back. He shoved the phone into his pocket harder than necessary. One of his friends laughed nervously. Your dad sounds thrilled. Ryan forced a smirk that did not quite reach his eyes. He likes controlling everybody. But even as he said it, his attention drifted back toward the elevator. Something about Elijah's face bothered him now. Not because it looked familiar. Because it did not look intimidated. People who feared powerful families usually carried it in their shoulders, their posture, their voice. Elijah had looked almost disappointed instead. Ryan finally climbed into the SUV and slammed the door shut. Rain streaked across the windshield beneath the parking garage lights while the engine rumbled alive. The low tire pressure warning flashed red immediately across the dashboard. Ryan stared at it for 2 seconds before muttering under his breath. Unbelievable. He threw the SUV into reverse harder than necessary and sped toward the exit ramp. Tires hissed across wet concrete as the city swallowed him back into the storm outside. 15 minutes later, Elijah Carter stepped through the front doors of St. Anne's Medical Center carrying the same small paper bag carefully tucked beneath his arm. Warm air rushed over him instantly, carrying the familiar smell of coffee, antiseptic, and floor polish. The hospital lobby glowed softly beneath amber lights while nurses moved quietly between stations near the elevators. Elijah paused briefly near the entrance, removing his rain-speckled glasses to wipe them with the edge of his sleeve. His shoulders sagged slightly now that nobody was watching him. The exhaustion he had hidden so carefully in the parking garage settled visibly into his face. A young nurse behind the reception desk smiled warmly the moment she saw him. "Evening, Mr. Carter." Elijah returned the smile gently. "Evening, Maria. Your mother has been asking for you every 10 minutes. He glanced toward the elevators. That means she is feeling stronger. Maria laughed softly. That means she is still your mother. Elijah chuckled under his breath before heading upstairs. The ride to the 6th floor was quiet except for the soft mechanical hum of the elevator cables. He loosened his tie slightly and rubbed the bridge of his nose as the doors opened again. The hallway lights were dimmer here. Softer. Outside room 614, he stopped for a moment before entering, his expression shifting instantly. The heaviness disappeared from his face, replaced by warmth. Evelyn Carter sat upright in bed beneath a pale blue blanket, silver curls framing her tired face while an old jazz record played quietly from a small speaker near the window. She looked up immediately when Elijah entered. "There you are," she said softly. "I thought the rain swallowed you." Elijah smiled and lifted the paper bag slightly. "Chicken soup. Exactly 2 crackers this time because your doctor threatened me yesterday." Evelyn rolled her eyes. "That woman enjoys bullying me." He sat carefully beside her bed and handed her the soup while steam drifted upward between them. Outside the hospital window, downtown Chicago shimmered beneath sheets of rain and distant headlights. For several quiet minutes, neither of them spoke much. Elijah adjusted her blanket once. Refilled her water cup. Smoothed the wrinkles from her sleeve absent-mindedly. Small gestures. Gentle habits formed over years. Finally Evelyn studied his face more closely. Something happened. Elijah leaned back slightly. "What makes you say that?" "Because your left eye twitches when you are carrying anger." He smiled faintly at that. "I am not angry." "Disappointed then?" Elijah stared toward the rain outside for a moment before answering quietly. A young man confused power with character tonight. Evelyn sighed softly as if she already understood more than he had said aloud. "And what did you do?" Elijah loosened his tie completely now. "I walked away." A slow smile touched her face. "Your father would be proud of that." Elijah lowered his eyes briefly at the mention of his late father. The jazz music crackled softly in the background while thunder rolled far outside the city skyline. Then Evelyn reached over gently and touched his hand. "The hardest people to forgive," she whispered, "are usually the people who have never been taught humility." Elijah looked down at her frail fingers resting against his. Then quietly toward the rain again. Somewhere across the city, Ryan Whitmore still had no idea whose life he had just collided with. By midnight, the storm over Chicago had turned the city silver. Rainwater streamed down courthouse windows, dripped from fire escapes, and painted the streets beneath downtown traffic in blurred ribbons of red and white light. Inside the Whitmore residence nearly 12 miles north of the city center, warmth and privilege wrapped around every polished surface. A stone fireplace crackled softly beneath a mounted television while expensive bourbon glowed amber inside crystal glasses near the kitchen island. Ryan Whitmore sat slouched across a leather couch with one sneaker hanging off his foot, scrolling mindlessly through social media videos while pretending not to think about the parking garage. But his mind kept drifting back there anyway. To the old man's face. To the strange calm in his voice. To the way he had walked away without fear. "You are distracted." Chief Daniel Whitmore stood near the kitchen counter loosening his tie with one hand while reading something on his tablet. Even at home, the man carried authority like armor. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Gray beginning to settle into his dark hair near the temples. His police uniform jacket hung neatly over a chair nearby, the gold stars on the collar catching warm light from the fireplace. Ryan barely looked up. Long night. Daniel studied his son for a second longer before setting the tablet down. "Councilman Reeves said you showed up late and smelled like whiskey." "I had one drink." "That is not the point." Ryan sighed loudly and tossed the phone onto the couch cushion beside him. "You ever get tired of controlling everything?" Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "You confuse discipline with control." "No," Ryan muttered. "You just like hearing yourself talk." Silence settled between them briefly while thunder rolled somewhere outside beyond the tall windows overlooking the lake. Daniel picked up his bourbon glass slowly. "You think this city respects weakness?" Ryan laughed quietly under his breath. "There it is." "There what is?" "The lecture." Daniel ignored the sarcasm. I spent 30 years building a name people fear crossing. His voice remained calm but heavy now. That matters. Ryan leaned his head back against the couch and stared at the ceiling. Fear is not respect. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Daniel's eyes narrowed immediately. And where exactly did you learn that? Ryan hesitated. For half a second, Elijah Carter's face flashed through his mind again beneath the parking garage lights. Calm eyes. Steady breathing. No fear. Ryan quickly looked away. Nowhere. Daniel took another sip from his glass. This city is changing, Ryan. People test authority every chance they get. If you do not stand strong, they walk over you. Ryan gave a faint nod but said nothing else. Somewhere deep down, something about that statement no longer sat right with him tonight. Upstairs, the Whitmore house remained perfectly still except for the distant hum of central heating and rain against the windows. Everything looked immaculate. Framed police commendations lined the upstairs hallway. Photos of Daniel shaking hands with governors, senators, commissioners. Ryan slowed briefly near one particular photograph hanging outside his bedroom. He stood beside his father at 16 years old, both smiling proudly after Ryan received a Community Leadership Award. Back then, he used to believe his father represented justice itself. Now he was not so sure what his father represented anymore. Inside his bedroom, Ryan dropped onto the edge of the mattress and stared toward the city skyline glowing faintly beyond the rain-streaked windows. His phone buzzed suddenly beside him. A text from his friend Trevor appeared. Dude. Somebody posted garage footage online. Ryan sat upright immediately. His stomach tightened. He opened the message. A shaky cell phone video filled the screen. Low quality. Grainy. Rainy. But recognizable. The parking garage. His voice. Elijah standing beneath the fluorescent lights. Ryan watched himself step closer to the older man while people murmured somewhere in the background. The clip ended before anything escalated further, but the comments beneath it were already multiplying by the second. Who is this guy? Another rich brat. Somebody said his dad is the police chief. Entitled behavior. Ryan locked the phone instantly and threw it onto the bed beside him. His chest tightened with irritation more than guilt. Yet underneath that irritation lived something unfamiliar. Unease. He stood and paced toward the bathroom sink, splashing cold water across his face while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Then he looked up at his own reflection in the mirror. For a brief moment, he heard Elijah's voice again. Anger makes people careless. Ryan shut his eyes hard. Downstairs, Chief Whitmore's phone suddenly rang across the kitchen counter. Daniel answered immediately. Whitmore. His expression shifted within seconds. The warmth disappeared from his face entirely. What video? Ryan froze halfway down the staircase as his father listened in silence. The house suddenly felt colder. Take it down, Daniel said sharply. Now. Another pause. His jaw tightened. I do not care who uploaded it. Ryan stepped quietly toward the bottom stair, watching his father from the shadows of the hallway. Daniel lowered his voice slightly. No. Nobody files anything tonight. I will handle it in the morning. The call ended. Silence swallowed the room. Daniel stood motionless beside the kitchen island, staring out the rain-covered windows with the bourbon glass still in his hand. Then slowly, he spoke without turning around. Ryan. Ryan's stomach dropped instantly. Yeah? Daniel finally looked back at him. The disappointment in his eyes felt heavier than anger. Tell me exactly what happened in that garage. The rain finally stopped just before sunrise, but the city still looked soaked in gray. Chicago moved slower after storms like this. Steam rose from subway grates. Delivery trucks hissed through puddles. Sidewalks reflected pale morning light beneath rows of dark office buildings downtown. Inside District 7 Police Headquarters, fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of desks while officers shuffled through paperwork and half-empty coffee cups. The smell of burnt coffee and damp uniforms lingered heavily through the bullpen. Officer Lena Brooks sat alone near the far corner reviewing overnight reports on a desktop monitor, her dark curls pulled tightly beneath her patrol cap while exhaustion settled beneath her eyes. She had only been on the force 3 years, but long enough to recognize when something about a report felt wrong. The parking garage incident file sat open on her screen now. Subject: disturbance involving unknown male. Lena frowned immediately. Unknown male. That was already strange. The older black man had introduced himself clearly. Elijah Carter. She remembered hearing it herself through the rain and echoing concrete walls. Her fingers tapped slowly against the desk while she reread the summary typed by another responding officer. Aggressive confrontation. Suspicious behavior near private vehicle. Subject resisted verbal instructions. Lena leaned back slightly in disbelief. Resisted, she whispered under her breath. That was not what happened. She remembered the older man standing perfectly still beneath the garage lights while Ryan Whitmore kept stepping closer. She remembered the calmness in his voice. Most of all, she remembered the look on the man's face. Not fear. Not aggression. Disappointment. Across the room, morning chatter rose between officers changing shifts. Somebody laughed loudly near the vending machines while a television mounted above the reception desk played muted local news coverage about overnight flooding downtown. Lena kept staring at the report. Then slowly, she opened the attached bodycam footage. Grainy video filled her monitor instantly. Rain streaked across the lens while distorted radio chatter crackled faintly in the background. She watched Ryan step closer to Elijah again beneath the flickering lights. Watched the older man remain composed while tension thickened around them. Then the footage paused briefly when the responding officers arrived. Lena remembered that moment clearly too. The shift in energy. The immediate assumption about who the threat was before anyone even asked questions. Her jaw tightened slightly. Brooks. Lena looked up quickly. Sergeant Nolan Hayes stood beside her desk holding a paper cup of coffee. Mid-50s. Heavy-set. Permanent tiredness in his eyes. Chief wants that garage file cleaned up before noon. Lena blinked once. Cleaned up? Hayes lowered his voice slightly. You know what I mean. Her stomach tightened immediately. Hayes glanced around the room before continuing quietly. The Whitmores are already dealing with enough heat online this morning. Lena looked back toward the paused bodycam footage on her screen. But the report is inaccurate. Hayes sighed heavily through his nose. Lena. The older man never threatened anyone. It is not your job to decide that. She hesitated only briefly. It should be. Hayes stared at her for several seconds. Then his expression softened slightly beneath the exhaustion. Listen to me carefully, he said quietly. You are smart. You work hard. But this department protects its own. Lena glanced toward the chief's glass office upstairs overlooking the bullpen floor. Empty for now. Even when they are wrong. Hayes took a slow sip of coffee. Especially then. Silence settled heavily between them while printers hummed nearby and officers moved through morning routines pretending not to hear. Finally Hayes placed a hand briefly against the edge of her desk. Just finish the paperwork. Then he walked away. Lena sat motionless for a long moment afterward. Outside the station windows, the city glowed cold and silver beneath low clouds. Her eyes drifted back toward the bodycam footage. Slowly, she hit play again. Elijah's voice filled the tiny speakers softly through the rain. Sometimes minding our business is exactly how people destroy their lives. Lena paused the video immediately. Goosebumps prickled along her arms. Something about the sentence lingered differently now. Not angry. Not defensive. Wise. Almost practiced. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then she noticed it for the first time. Near the end of the footage, just before the responding officers approached, Elijah adjusted the worn leather briefcase beneath his arm. A gold seal flashed briefly against the side pocket beneath the rainwater. Lena froze. She rewound the footage carefully frame by frame until the image sharpened just enough beneath the flickering garage lights. United States District Court. Her heartbeat slowed instantly. "No way," she whispered. She enlarged the frame further. The seal remained partially blurred but unmistakable. Federal court credentials. Suddenly every piece of the night rearranged itself in her mind. The composure. The language. The restraint. The way he spoke like someone accustomed to authority without needing to display it. Lena opened a new browser tab immediately and typed Elijah Carter into the court database. The loading wheel spun for 2 long seconds. Then the screen populated with results. Honorable Elijah J. Carter, United States Federal Judge. Lena stared at the monitor while cold realization settled through her chest. The room around her seemed quieter suddenly. Far away. She clicked the official profile slowly. Appointment records. Judicial history. Civil rights rulings stretching back nearly 15 years. Community service awards. Legal lectures at Northwestern. Her mouth went dry. Upstairs, the chief's office door suddenly slammed open. Daniel Whitmore strode across the second-floor balcony with sharp, purposeful steps while officers straightened instinctively below him. Lena quickly minimized the screen, but her pulse still hammered beneath her collar. Chief Whitmore stopped halfway along the railing and addressed the bullpen floor in a voice that carried through the entire station. "Nobody speaks to the media about last night." Silence answered him immediately. "Nobody releases footage. Nobody discusses my son." His eyes swept the room hard as stone. "Is that understood?" Officers nodded quietly around the bullpen. Lena looked down toward the hidden court profile still glowing faintly behind her minimized windows. Then slowly back up toward the chief. For the first time since joining the department, she realized she might be staring directly at a man who had no idea how quickly his entire world was about to change. The city exploded before lunchtime. By 10:30 in the morning, clips from the parking garage had spread across social media faster than anyone inside District 7 could contain them. Local blogs reposted the footage first. Then radio stations picked it up. Then came the national commentators with slow-motion edits, dramatic captions, and headlines about privilege, abuse of power, and police favoritism. Every few minutes another notification lit up phones throughout the station. Officers pretended not to check them, but everyone did. Inside Chief Whitmore's office, tension pressed against the walls like heat before a storm. Daniel Whitmore stood near his desk with both hands planted against the polished wood surface while 3 city officials argued quietly around him. The blinds behind his office remained half-closed, slicing gray daylight across the carpet in sharp lines. "This thing is spiraling," Deputy Mayor Collins muttered while rubbing his forehead. "The press already knows Ryan is your son." Daniel's jaw tightened. "The footage is incomplete." "It does not matter anymore," Collins snapped. People already made up their minds. A television mounted silently against the office wall replayed blurry garage footage over and over beneath a bright red headline, "Police Chief's Son Under Fire After Viral Incident." Ryan sat in the corner leather chair watching the screen with folded arms, trying to appear calm even while his stomach twisted tighter by the minute. Every replay made him look worse. Arrogant. Aggressive. Entitled. Worst of all, Elijah still looked calm in every frame. That calmness irritated Ryan now more than ever because he could not stop comparing it to himself. "I can issue a statement," Daniel said finally. "We frame it as a misunderstanding." Collins laughed bitterly under his breath. "A misunderstanding does not trend nationally in 6 hours." Another official lowered his voice carefully. "There is something else." Daniel looked up sharply. "What?" The man hesitated. The older man involved. Ryan glanced over immediately. What about him? The official slid a tablet slowly across the desk. Somebody identified him online. Daniel grabbed the tablet. His expression remained firm at first. Then it changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. A slight tightening around the eyes. A pause too long to ignore. Ryan noticed instantly. What? Daniel did not answer immediately. The room grew strangely quiet. Except for the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Then Daniel set the tablet down slowly. Who confirmed this? The official swallowed hard. Court records. Ryan stood halfway from his chair. Confirmed what? Daniel finally looked toward his son. His name is Elijah Carter. Ryan frowned. Yeah. I know that. Another pause. Longer this time. Heavy. He is a federal judge. The words landed like concrete. Ryan stared blankly for 2 full seconds as if his brain refused to process them. No, he said immediately. That is not possible. Nobody answered him. The television continued replaying the garage footage silently in the background while rainwater still streaked faintly against the office windows outside. Ryan suddenly remembered the briefcase. The way Elijah spoke. The strange patience in his voice. The complete absence of fear. Oh God. His chest tightened instantly. You are sure? Daniel's face hardened again, but the confidence was gone now. United States District Court. 15 years on the bench. Ryan sank slowly back into the chair. A cold numbness spread through his stomach. He never said anything. Collins let out a dry laugh. People with real power usually do not. Silence swallowed the office. Downstairs in the bullpen, Officer Lena Brooks stood frozen beside the printer station after overhearing enough through the partially open office door upstairs. Around her, whispers moved quickly between desks now. Federal judge. Elijah Carter. Civil rights rulings. National reputation. Every new detail spread through the station like electricity. Lena looked toward the staircase leading upstairs where Chief Whitmore now stood staring through the glass office walls with one hand pressed against his mouth. For the first time, the chief looked uncertain. Human. Vulnerable. Ryan suddenly stood again. I need to talk to him. Daniel snapped toward him immediately. No, Dad, you stay quiet until I tell you otherwise. Ryan's voice cracked slightly with frustration. I did not know who he was. Daniel stepped closer now, lowering his voice sharply. That is exactly the problem. The room went still again. Ryan looked away first. Somewhere deep down, shame finally began replacing defensiveness. Not because Elijah was powerful. Because Elijah had warned him. Walk away before you destroy your future. Ryan could hear the sentence perfectly now. At the courthouse downtown, Elijah Carter stood alone inside his chambers adjusting the cuffs of a fresh navy suit while soft morning light spilled across shelves lined with legal books and framed photographs. The office smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Outside the tall windows, Chicago traffic crawled through wet streets beneath clearing skies. A clerk stepped quietly into the room carrying a folder. Your Honor, she said carefully, the media is requesting comment regarding the incident. Elijah remained still for a moment before taking the folder from her hands. And what exactly would they like me to say? Most outlets are asking whether you plan to pursue charges. Elijah glanced briefly toward the television mounted silently near the corner of the room. His own face appeared across the screen beside footage from the garage. He looked older on television somehow. More tired. No statement, he answered softly. The clerk hesitated. Sir, after what happened, Elijah closed the folder calmly. The law is not revenge. The clerk nodded quietly and stepped back out. Alone again, Elijah walked slowly toward the large courtroom window overlooking the city. Sunlight finally began breaking through the clouds now, reflecting gold across wet rooftops downtown. He loosened one breath slowly through his nose. Then his eyes lowered toward the crowded courthouse steps far below where reporters had already begun gathering behind metal barricades. Somewhere across the city, Ryan Whitmore was finally learning the difference between power people inherit and respect people earn. By late afternoon, the courthouse had become the center of the city's attention. News vans lined the streets outside the federal building beneath rows of fluttering American flags while reporters crowded the sidewalks holding microphones against the cold wind rolling off Lake Michigan. Camera flashes burst constantly near the courthouse steps. Every few minutes another headline appeared online. Federal judge identified in viral garage incident. Questions grow around police chief's response. The city no longer whispered about the Whitmores now. It watched them openly. Inside his chambers on the 23rd floor, Elijah Carter sat quietly near the tall windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Golden sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor now that the storm had finally passed, painting long shadows between stacks of legal files arranged neatly across his desk. The room remained calm despite the chaos outside. A half-finished cup of black coffee sat untouched beside a framed photograph of Elijah and his mother taken years earlier at a community fundraiser. In the photo, both of them smiled warmly beneath summer sunlight. Elijah stared at it for a moment before leaning back slowly in his chair. The silence inside the office felt heavy but peaceful. Then came a soft knock at the door. "Come in." His law clerk, Vanessa Reed, stepped carefully into the room carrying another folder against her chest. She looked nervous now. "Sir, there is something you should probably see." Elijah accepted the folder without speaking. Inside were printed screenshots from social media, local editorials, and public statements flooding the internet by the minute. Some defended him. Others condemned Ryan Whitmore. A few demanded resignations already. Elijah turned pages slowly, expression unreadable. Vanessa hesitated before speaking again. "People are angry." Elijah nodded once. "People usually are. Do you think Chief Whitmore knew who you were?" Elijah closed the folder carefully. No, would it have changed anything? That question lingered in the room longer than expected. Outside the windows, traffic moved through downtown intersections like streams of light beneath the fading afternoon sky. Finally Elijah answered quietly. "That is exactly the problem." Vanessa lowered her eyes slightly. "Sir," Elijah stood slowly and walked toward the window overlooking the city. Far below, reporters clustered around the courthouse entrance while police barriers separated crowds gathering outside. "If respect only exists when power is recognized," he said softly, "then it is not respect at all." Vanessa said nothing after that. She simply nodded quietly before leaving the room again. Alone once more, Elijah loosened his tie slightly and stared down at the city beneath him. Somewhere out there, a young man was probably sitting inside a comfortable house wondering how his life had unraveled so quickly. Elijah closed his eyes briefly. Then he remembered his mother's voice from the night before. The hardest people to forgive are usually the people who have never been taught humility. Across the city, Ryan Whitmore sat alone in his bedroom with every curtain drawn shut against the fading daylight outside. The television remained muted, but the captions rolling across the screen said enough. Commentators discussed accountability. Legal analysts debated public misconduct. Online videos replayed the parking garage confrontation from every possible angle. Ryan leaned forward with both elbows resting against his knees, staring blankly at the floor while the room glowed pale blue from the television light. His phone had not stopped vibrating for hours. Friends texting. Reporters calling. Strangers sending messages ranging from insults to threats. He ignored all of them. For the first time in years, silence felt safer than speaking. Downstairs, he could hear his father pacing through the kitchen while another heated phone conversation echoed faintly through the house. Ryan rubbed both hands slowly against his face. Then his eyes drifted toward the paused image on television. Elijah standing beneath the parking garage lights. Calm. Composed. Dignified. Ryan suddenly realized something that made his stomach tighten again. The older man had never once tried to embarrass him publicly afterward. Never released a statement. Never insulted him online. Never acted vindictive. Even now, Elijah Carter remained quieter than everyone else involved. That silence hurt more than anger would have. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Ryan?" His mother's voice came gently through the door. "Can I come in?" Ryan hesitated before answering quietly. "Yeah." Claire Whitmore entered carrying a tray with untouched soup and iced tea. Unlike Daniel, Claire moved softly. Through rooms. Warm eyes. Calm posture. The kind of woman who lowered her voice instead of raising it. She set the tray carefully beside him without speaking immediately. "You should eat something." Ryan stared down at the bowl. "Not hungry." Claire sat beside him slowly on the edge of the bed. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then she asked quietly, "What happened in that garage?" Ryan swallowed hard. "I do not know." "Yes, you do." He finally looked at her then. His eyes appeared tired now. Younger somehow beneath the weight pressing into him. He looked at me like. Ryan stopped. "Like what?" Ryan stared toward the television screen again. Like he was disappointed before I even gave him a reason to be. Claire remained silent for a moment. Then she touched his hand gently. Sometimes people carry dignity so naturally that it exposes everyone else around them. Ryan laughed bitterly under his breath. "Dad says strength means people fearing you." Claire's expression softened sadly. "Your father learned that a long time ago." Was he wrong? Outside the bedroom windows, sunset burned orange across the skyline while cold wind rattled branches against the glass. Claire looked toward the fading light for a moment before answering. "Fear can control people," she said quietly. "But it never changes hearts." Ryan lowered his eyes again. Downstairs, Daniel Whitmore's voice rose sharply through another phone call while news helicopters thudded faintly somewhere over the city. The entire house felt tense now. Tight. Like something enormous was approaching. Ryan leaned back slowly against the headboard and closed his eyes for a second. In the darkness behind them, he could still hear Elijah Carter's calm voice beneath the rain. "One bad decision can follow you forever." And for the first time since that night in the parking garage, Ryan Whitmore realized the older man had not been threatening him. He had been warning him. Morning arrived cold and bright over downtown Chicago, but the tension hanging over the federal courthouse felt heavier than the gray clouds gathering once again above the skyline. Metal barricades lined the front steps while reporters crowded. Shoulder to shoulder outside the entrance, bundled in dark coats with microphones raised toward every black SUV pulling near the curb. Police officers stood watch near the doors, their radios crackling softly beneath the noise of camera shutters and distant traffic. Across the street, people gathered behind the barricades holding phones high, waiting for another glimpse of the story that had swallowed the city overnight. Inside the courthouse lobby, marble floors reflected pale morning light beneath towering columns while security officers guided visitors through metal detectors in tense silence. Every hallway conversation stopped the moment Ryan Whitmore stepped through the entrance beside his father. The sound of camera shutters exploded immediately from outside the glass doors behind them. Ryan kept his head lowered beneath the weight of dozens of watching eyes. He had barely slept. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes now, and the confidence that once followed him everywhere had vanished completely. Chief Daniel Whitmore walked beside him in full dress uniform, jaw clenched so tightly the muscles near his temple twitched every few seconds. Neither man spoke while they crossed the lobby. The silence between them no longer felt angry. It felt fragile. Upstairs on the 23rd floor, Elijah Carter adjusted the cuff of his navy suit while standing alone near the courtroom doors. The gold seal stitched onto the courtroom wall behind him glowed softly beneath overhead lights. Clerks moved quietly through the hallway carrying folders and legal pads, but nobody disturbed him. Elijah looked composed as always, though exhaustion lingered faintly beneath his calm eyes. Officer Lena Brooks stood farther down the hallway near the elevators, clutching a thin case file against her chest. She had volunteered to deliver supplemental evidence personally after discovering discrepancies in the original report. The bodycam footage rested inside the folder now. Unedited. Untouched. Truth preserved exactly as it happened. Lena watched Elijah quietly for a moment before finally approaching him. "Your Honor." Elijah turned gently toward her. "Officer Brooks." She swallowed. Nervously. "I wanted to apologize." Elijah's expression softened slightly. "For what?" "For not speaking sooner." Elijah glanced briefly toward the folder in her hands. "You are here now." Lena looked down for a second before nodding quietly. That simple answer unsettled her more than anger would have. Before she could respond, movement stirred at the far end of the hallway. Ryan Whitmore had just stepped off the elevator beside his father. The hallway instantly grew still. Ryan looked up the moment he saw Elijah standing near the courtroom doors. For several seconds, nobody moved. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead while courthouse staff pretended not to stare. Ryan felt his throat tighten immediately. Elijah looked exactly the same as he had in the parking garage. Calm posture. Steady eyes. Quiet dignity. Yet somehow the courthouse transformed him into something even larger than Ryan remembered. Not because of the robe waiting inside the courtroom. Because the entire building itself seemed to respect him naturally. Ryan lowered his eyes first. Daniel stepped forward stiffly beside his son. "Judge Carter." Elijah nodded politely. "Chief Whitmore." Daniel cleared his throat once. "I would like a private conversation before proceedings begin." Elijah studied him for a brief moment. Then he glanced toward Ryan standing silently beside him. "Very well." Moments later, the four of them stood inside a quiet conference room overlooking the city. Rain clouds drifted slowly across the skyline beyond tall windows while distant sirens echoed faintly somewhere below. Nobody sat down. Daniel removed his police cap carefully and held it against his side. The gesture alone revealed more humility than Ryan had seen from his father in years. "Judge Carter," Daniel began slowly, "whatever mistakes were made," Elijah raised one hand gently. "Chief." The room fell silent instantly. Elijah's voice remained calm but firm. "Do not insult both of us by calling them mistakes." Daniel's face tightened slightly. Ryan stared at the floor. Elijah continued quietly. "Your son judged me before he knew my name. Your department wrote reports before asking questions. And half this. City only cared once they learned my title." His eye shifted slowly between both men now. "That is not misunderstanding. That is culture." The word settled heavily into the room. Daniel opened his mouth briefly, then stopped. For perhaps the first time in decades, he looked like a man without a defense prepared. Ryan finally spoke, voice rough and uncertain. "I really did not know who you were." Elijah looked at him quietly. "And if I had not been a judge?" Ryan froze. Silence swallowed the room. Outside the windows, rain began tapping lightly against the glass again. Ryan's chest tightened painfully because he already knew the answer. Elijah stepped closer slowly now, not intimidating, not angry. "Just honest." "Young man," he said softly, "the danger of privilege is not that it makes people cruel." Ryan looked up reluctantly. Elijah's eyes remained steady. "It is that it convinces them other people's dignity depends on being important." Ryan's eyes lowered again almost immediately. Shame burned hotter now because deep down he knew every word was true. Daniel exhaled heavily through his nose. "Judge Carter. I failed him." Elijah looked toward the chief quietly. "No," another pause. "You trained him." The sentence hit harder than anything else spoken in the room. Daniel's shoulders sagged almost invisibly. For the first time since entering the courthouse, Ryan looked toward his father not with fear, but with realization. Everything he believed strength looked like had been inherited from the man standing beside him. The silence that followed felt enormous. Then a clerk knocked softly at the conference room door. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "the courtroom is ready." Elijah nodded once. He adjusted the cuff of his suit calmly before moving toward the door. Ryan stepped aside immediately without being asked. As Elijah passed him, he paused briefly. "One bad decision does follow you forever," he said quietly. Ryan swallowed hard. Elijah's expression softened just slightly. "Unless you become wise enough to let it change you." Then he walked out toward the courtroom while the sound of reporters outside the building rose faintly through the rain. The courtroom. Doors opened slowly at exactly 9:03 in the morning, and the sound of hundreds of whispered conversations immediately dissolved into silence. Every seat inside the federal courtroom was filled. Reporters lined the back wall with notepads ready while courthouse officers stood motionless near the exits beneath the soft glow of brass wall lamps. Rain tapped steadily against the tall windows overlooking downtown Chicago, turning the gray morning light silver across the polished wood floors. Ryan Whitmore sat beside his father at the defense table wearing a dark suit that suddenly felt too tight around his chest. He had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the parking garage in his mind. But nothing prepared him for this room. Nothing prepared him for the weight of seeing Elijah Carter walk toward the bench in full judicial robes while every single person inside the courtroom rose to their feet in silence. The movement happened instantly. Lawyers, officers, journalists, clerks. Even Daniel Whitmore stood. Ryan followed a second later, slower than everyone else, his heartbeat pounding hard enough to shake his hands beneath the table. Elijah moved with the same calm dignity he carried in the parking garage, except now the entire room shifted around him naturally. Respect did not surround him because people were forced to give it. It surrounded him because he had earned it long before any of them entered the building. Elijah took his seat behind the bench slowly while the gold seal of the United States glowed behind him beneath soft overhead lighting. "Be seated," he said calmly. Chairs moved gently across the floor as everyone sat again. Ryan could barely breathe normally. The courtroom felt colder than before. Smaller somehow. Across the room, Officer Lena Brooks sat near the witness section clutching the corrected case file tightly in her lap. Her eyes drifted briefly toward Ryan before returning to Elijah. Nobody spoke carelessly in his courtroom. Nobody interrupted. Even the reporters lowered their voices instinctively. Elijah opened the file before him with measured calm. "Before this court proceeds," he said quietly, "there are matters regarding the incident currently receiving public attention that must be addressed directly and truthfully." Every camera lens in the room seemed to focus at once. Ryan lowered his eyes toward the table. Daniel sat rigid beside him, staring straight ahead like a soldier awaiting judgment. Elijah glanced toward Officer Brooks. "Officer Lena Brooks." She stood immediately. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you submit supplemental evidence to this court this morning?" "I did." "And why was that necessary?" Lena swallowed once before answering carefully. "Because the original police report did not accurately reflect the events captured by body camera footage." A murmur moved softly through the courtroom before dying again almost instantly. Elijah nodded once. "Truth matters most when it is inconvenient," he said quietly. Then his eyes shifted toward the prosecution table where senior city attorneys now looked visibly uncomfortable. "Play the footage." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a large monitor flickered alive near the jury box. Rain-filled footage from the parking garage appeared once more beneath the cold fluorescent lights from that night. Ryan stared at the screen helplessly while his own voice echoed through the courtroom louder than he remembered. Sharp. Dismissive. Arrogant. Every sentence sounded uglier now, surrounded by silence. Nobody interrupted the footage. Nobody defended him. The only sounds inside the courtroom were rain from the video and the faint hum of the projector overhead. Then came Elijah's calm voice from the recording. "Sometimes minding our business is exactly how people destroy their lives." Ryan shut his eyes briefly. Hearing the words again inside this room felt unbearable now. The footage ended. Silence followed. Long, heavy. Elijah folded his hands calmly atop the bench. "Mr. Whitmore," he said quietly. Ryan looked up immediately, throat tight. "Yes, sir." "Stand." Ryan obeyed slowly, his knees weaker than he expected. Hundreds of eyes followed him upward. Elijah studied him silently for a moment before speaking again. "Do you understand why this incident reached beyond a single parking garage?" Ryan swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Then explain it." Ryan opened his mouth once before no words came out. He glanced briefly toward his father beside him. Daniel stared forward silently, unable to help him now. Finally Ryan looked back toward Elijah. "Because," his voice cracked slightly. He steadied himself. "Because I thought respect depended on who someone was." Elijah remained still. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly before continuing more quietly. "I treated you like you mattered less before I knew your title." No movement came from the bench. No anger. No satisfaction either. Just stillness. Ryan's throat tightened harder now. "And the worst part is," he paused, breathing unevenly, "I do not think I even realized I was doing it." The courtroom remained completely silent. Even the reporters stopped writing for a moment. Elijah finally leaned back slightly in his chair. "Awareness," he said softly, "is the beginning of accountability." Ryan nodded faintly, eyes burning now with humiliation deeper than public embarrassment. It was something worse. Recognition. Beside him, Daniel Whitmore slowly removed his police cap and placed it carefully on the table in front of him. The small movement drew attention across the courtroom instantly. Daniel stood next. His voice sounded older than before. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I spent years teaching officers that authority meant control." He lowered his eyes briefly. "Somewhere along the way, my son learned the same lesson from me." Elijah watched him carefully without speaking. Daniel's jaw tightened once. "That failure belongs to me too." Rain continued tapping gently against the courthouse windows while the entire room sat frozen in silence. Then Elijah Carter looked between father and son one final time before speaking words neither man would ever forget. "The measure of a person is not whether they fall," he said calmly. "It is whether they become honest enough to rise differently afterward." Ryan felt tears burn unexpectedly behind his eyes. Not from fear. Not even from shame anymore. From the painful realization that the man he had humiliated in a parking garage was now showing him more grace than he deserved. By the time the courtroom finally emptied, evening had settled gently over downtown Chicago. The rain had stopped again, leaving the streets below slick and reflective beneath rows of glowing streetlights and passing headlights. Inside the courthouse, the noise of reporters and hurried footsteps slowly faded into distant echoes through the marble hallways. One by one, lawyers gathered their files. Clerks shut down computers. Security officers removed temporary barricades from the lobby downstairs. But the silence lingering after Elijah Carter's final words remained heavier than everything else. Ryan Whitmore sat alone at the defense table long after most people had already left. His loosened tie rested unevenly against his collar while his hands stayed clasped tightly together in front of him. For the first time in years, nobody approached him with nervous smiles or careful approval. Nobody treated him like the center of the room. And strangely, that no longer frightened him the way he thought it would. Across the courtroom, Chief Daniel Whitmore stood near the back wall staring quietly at the American flag hanging beside the bench. The gold trim along his police uniform caught the fading courtroom light, but the authority he once carried so naturally seemed dimmer now. Smaller. Human. He had spent most of his life believing leadership meant command. Tonight, standing inside the silence of Elijah Carter's courtroom, he finally understood how often command had cost him compassion. Near the courtroom doors, Officer Lena Brooks quietly organized folders into a leather case while watching both men from a distance. She had testified honestly despite pressure from nearly every direction to remain quiet. Her career inside the department might never fully recover from that decision. Yet for the first time since joining the force, she felt able to breathe without carrying shame beneath the uniform. The soft creak of the courtroom door interrupted the silence. Elijah Carter stepped back inside holding his folded judicial robe over one arm. Without the robe, he looked once again like the quiet older man from the parking garage. Tired eyes. Simple navy suit. Calm presence. Yet the room itself still seemed to straighten around him naturally. Ryan rose immediately the moment he saw him. Daniel followed a second later. Nobody spoke at first. Outside the tall courthouse windows, sunset burned softly against the wet skyline while city lights flickered awake below. Elijah walked slowly toward the center aisle and stopped several feet from them. Ryan swallowed hard before speaking quietly. "Your Honor," Elijah shook his head gently. "Elijah is fine." The simple sentence seemed to humble Ryan even more. He lowered his eyes briefly. "I do not know how to apologize for what I did." Elijah studied him for a moment. "That is because apologies are easy when they cost nothing." Ryan nodded faintly. "Then tell me what to do." Elijah glanced toward the darkening city outside the windows before answering softly. "Learn to see dignity before status." The courtroom fell silent again. Daniel stepped forward carefully now, removing the gold badge clipped to his uniform belt. The metal caught one final streak of orange sunset as he held it in his hand. "This badge used to mean something honorable to me," he admitted quietly. "Somewhere along the way, I started using it like armor instead." He looked toward Elijah directly. "I cannot undo what my son learned from watching me." His voice roughened slightly. "But I can stop teaching it." Elijah's eyes rested briefly on the badge in Daniel's hand before lifting again toward the chief's face. "Real authority," he said calmly, "does not protect pride. It protects people." Daniel lowered his head slowly. No defense came this time. No excuses. Just silence and acceptance. Ryan looked between both men while emotion tightened visibly across his face. "I thought respect came from power," he admitted quietly. Elijah gave a faint sad smile. "Most broken systems teach young men exactly that." Outside the courtroom, distant janitor carts rolled softly through the hallway while courthouse lights dimmed one section at a time. The building itself seemed to exhale after a long day. Elijah moved toward the courtroom doors slowly, pausing beside Lena Brooks on his way out. "Officer Brooks." "Yes, sir." "Thank you for choosing truth." When it became uncomfortable, Lena straightened slightly, emotion flickering briefly across her face. "I almost did not." Elijah nodded gently. Courage rarely arrives before fear. Then he continued toward the hallway. Ryan watched him leave, but this time he did not see a federal judge walking away. He saw a man who had every reason to destroy him publicly and chose wisdom instead. That realization stayed heavier than humiliation ever could. A few moments later, Elijah stepped outside the courthouse alone. The air smelled clean after the rain. Wind moved softly through the city streets while television crews packed away cables and cameras near the sidewalks. Most reporters had already gone home. The frenzy had faded. Across the street, traffic lights reflected red and gold against wet pavement while distant sirens drifted through the evening air like fading echoes. Elijah stopped briefly at the top of the courthouse stairs and looked out across the city. Behind him, the large courthouse doors opened once more. Ryan stepped outside slowly, hands buried deep inside his coat pockets. He stopped several feet away without speaking. Elijah glanced toward him calmly. Ryan hesitated before finally saying the only honest thing left inside him. "You warned me." Elijah looked back toward the city lights again. Sometimes warnings are kindness people only recognize afterward. Ryan nodded quietly. No cameras remained now. No reporters. No courtroom audience. Just two men standing beneath cold evening wind and the glow of courthouse lights. For several long seconds neither of them spoke again. Then Elijah descended the courthouse steps slowly and disappeared into the moving city crowd below. Ryan remained standing there watching until the older man was completely gone from sight. Above him, the American flag continued moving gently against the dark Chicago sky while rainwater glimmered across the empty courthouse steps like silver beneath the lights. And for the first time in his life, Ryan Whitmore finally understood that the strongest people in the world were not the ones others feared most. They were the ones who still chose grace after being given every reason not to.